Hi Guy, welcome back TV spoilers. Newman Enterprises has always known how to function like a fortress, doors closed, information locked down, loyalty measured by silence. But at the exact moment Victor believes he still controls everything through instinct, suspicion, and preemptive strikes, Kyle begins to move like a variable no one can categorize anymore. On the surface, he arrives with the posture of a peacemaker, carrying an explanation that sounds almost too reasonable for Genoa City. He wants to calm the tension, he wants a fresh opportunity. He wants to prove he is no longer just a pawn in a war between two empires. Yet the more logical his reasons appear, the more suffocating the atmosphere becomes. Because in this town, smooth explanations are often the clean wrapping around a blade that has been sharpened for weeks. The fracture between Kyle and Victor is not something that formed overnight. It is the result of accumulated moments of being used, being dismissed as a convenient tool, being pressured into choices that benefit the stronger player. And when Kyle finally decides he has lost too much of what matters to him, especially where Jabot is concerned, he stops trying to win anything back through words. He wants to take it back through leverage. Kyle understands Victor with a clarity that even Victor's allies rarely admit out loud. He knows Victor does not fight only with money and influence, but with the helplessness he plants inside his opponents, the quiet doubt that makes them rush, lose patience, reveal their weak spots, and then blame themselves for the collapse. So Kyle does not come at Victor like a loud rebel. He infiltrates. He requests a strategic role at Newman Enterprises in a way that does not set off alarms. He tolerates the suspicious stares, the tests, even the deliberate pressure meant to make him flinch. Because he understands something crucial, Victor is most dangerous when he believes he has already won. Kyle presents himself as the man who is learning the rules again, standing straighter, speaking carefully, offering efficiency, offering obedience, offering just enough humility to be believable. Every move is calibrated so Victor sees a benefit, almost a trophy, an Abbott inside Newman. Proof that the Newmans can pull the Abbotts into their orbit. But Kyle is not there to be a trophy. He is there to become the perfect insider, close enough to hear the fortress breathe and to find the one place where it is vulnerable. The true danger is not simply that Kyle might betray Victor. The real danger is that Kyle makes Victor believe he will not. He earns trust through small, consistent actions, through silence at the right moments, through agreement delivered at precisely the right temperature. And while Victor convinces himself he is taming an Abbott, Kyle is quietly unlocking other doors, internal data, financial pathways, operational traces of an AI program Victor once treated as a supreme weapon. On the surface, Newman versus Abbott remains the familiar war of power, influence, and legacy. Underneath, the conflict is sliding into something darker. A territory where a single command can erase a life's stability. Where technology can become evidence and can also become a crime. Kyle is not satisfied with sabotaging Victor's plans just to reclaim ground for Jabot. He wants to do it in a way that cannot be reversed. He wants Victor cornered in a place where intimidation and reputation cannot end the argument. Where law and proof have a weight that even Victor cannot simply purchase or bully into silence. That is why the card Kyle holds is not a vague threat or a dramatic tantrum. It is an ace powerful enough for the Abbott family to use as leverage. A pressure point that could force Victor to feel what it is like to be pushed to the edge. Kyle's strategy is cold precisely because it is patient. He is building a case from the inside, step by step. As if he is gathering the pieces of a puzzle Victor never expected anyone else to see. Jack and Diane, of course, cannot avoid asking what Kyle is doing. To them, he is still their son, the heir, the man who has stumbled before and paid for it. The person they want to trust and yet fear trusting. They sense something unsettling in his composure. A calm that only appears when someone has already made a final decision. When they press him, Kyle does not dodge. He does not deliver a theatrical confession. He drops a truth heavy enough to change the air in the room. He has uncovered shocking information about Matt Clark, and that information points back to Victor. The name alone carries instability, the image of a person who can be pushed into ruin. A future that can be wiped out because someone powerful wanted to prove dominance. Kyle speaks of it not as a rumor but as a potential charge. What Kyle has pieced together is worse than simple corporate cruelty. He believes Victor used an AI program to wipe out Matt's finances, and that the pattern suggests something calculated, timed, and executed with the cold precision Victor prefers. In Kyle's mind, this is not a business tactic anymore. It is the transformation of technology into a silent weapon. And when he lays this in front of Jack and Diane, he does not need to exaggerate. The detail itself is already monstrous. AI is no longer a tool. It is an invisible hand capable of choking the life out of someone's stability, while leaving behind a clean-looking story on paper. That is where Kyle's value to the Abbotts becomes terrifyingly clear. If the Abbott family once believed they needed proof of broader illegal activity tied to Arabesque, Kyle sees a sharper, more direct route. They may not need to prove every shadowy operation. If they can prove criminal behavior toward Matt, it becomes a focused strike, a clear target, a single thread strong enough to pull an entire suit apart. Jack and Diane feel the rush of relief that comes with finally holding something that could hurt Victor, but the relief is immediately poisoned by a new fear. Because once this war moves into a courtroom, it stops being a battle of pride and market share. It becomes a battle of survival, where one misstep can destroy not only an enemy but also the family holding the weapon. Kyle, in all of this, does not turn himself into a hero. He knows what he is doing is dangerous, and he knows the danger is not only external. Infiltrating Newman Enterprises is not just taking a job. It is entering the territory of a man who lives on suspicion and thrives on counterattacks. Kyle must endure the daily strain of living into realities at once, seeing Victor as his boss, while also seeing him as the target, presenting loyalty while quietly building a pipeline of information back to Jack. Every time Kyle walks past a conference room door, he has to wonder whether new cameras have been installed, whether a trap is already waiting for him to step into, whether Victor has already noticed the tiny shifts in Kyle's behavior. And at the same time, Kyle has to face the most painful question of all. Is he doing this for Jabot, for the Abbott legacy, or for the hunger to prove that Victor cannot always be the winner? Victor does not experience fear as panic. He experiences it as a thin sheet of cold along the spine, a quiet instinct that something inside the system has clicked. Victor may not yet know what Kyle has collected, but he understands the principle better than anyone. The most effective insider is the one who convinces you there is no need to guard against them. That is why Kyle, once welcomed as a strategic advantage, can quickly become the most dangerous threat in the entire building. If Kyle's evidence is strong enough, connected enough, documented enough to live beyond whispers, Victor is no longer facing an ugly corporate rivalry. He is facing the possibility of legal defeat, the possibility of being seen as a man who used technology to destroy a person in a way that cannot be explained away as normal competition. Jack and Diane cannot simply celebrate the idea of having an ace. They understand Victor's nature. Victor does not allow himself to be flipped over without making someone pay for it. If the Abbotts use Matt as a lever, they may also be placing Matt in the center of a war he cannot survive emotionally or financially. If they expose the AI angle, they are admitting something even more unsettling. The war has entered a new era, where a line of code can function like a gunshot and still leave the room looking spotless. Jack looks at Kyle with a new awareness, as if he is seeing not a son reacting emotionally but a strategist who can wait, strike precisely, and turn truth into a weapon. Diane's fear runs deeper because she recognizes the psychological cost of living double. The sleepless nights where you hear footsteps that are not there. The moment you begin to distrust even your own instincts. Kyle recognizes it too, and that recognition makes him quieter, not louder. He cannot explain everything he has swallowed to keep his role intact. He cannot admit how many times he wanted to stop, turn around, tell Victor he is done playing this dirty game. But if he does that, everything he has gathered becomes worthless, and the Abbotts are forced back into defense. Kyle keeps telling himself the war is no longer about pride, that it is about Jabot's survival, about refusing to let the Newmans write the rules forever. And beneath that, there is something even sharper. This is a rare chance to drag Victor out of his untouchable zone, even once, to force him to face consequences that cannot be smothered by reputation. That is why Kyle's alternative solution for Jack and Diane is not a plan so much as a moral line. How do they use evidence without becoming a version of Victor? How do they push Victor toward court without turning the conflict into a bloodbath that destroys everything in its path? If the Abbotts win by bringing Victor down, will it be a true victory? Or will it simply open a new cycle of revenge that Victor will return to twice as vicious? No one says these questions out loud, but they sit inside every pause, every glance exchanged. Every moment Jack and Diane look at Kyle and then at each other as if they have finally been handed what they needed most and also what could ruin them fastest. Kyle knows that if he slips even once, the collapse will hit him first. If Victor discovers that Kyle is planting evidence or building a case from inside, Kyle becomes the primary target and the Abbotts become collateral damage in the retaliation. If Kyle reveals his ace too early, he risks exposing himself before the evidence can stand on its own. If he holds it too long, Victor gains time to break it at the root, to turn proof into noise. Or worse, to flip the narrative so that Kyle becomes the guilty party holding the weapon. Kyle tells himself he has gone too far to turn back. But even that thought carries a warning. When someone believes they cannot turn back, that is when they are most likely to make the mistake that ends them. And so the most frightening part is not whether Kyle has enough proof. The most frightening part is the moment he must decide how to use it. If he forces Victor into court through the story of Matt and the AI, the Abbotts could gain a power advantage they have never truly held. But if Victor has already sensed the shift, if the fortress has already started sealing off doors Kyle did not know existed, then Kyle may have been walking into something far worse than a simple infiltration. Because what if the faint click Kyle thought was him unlocking the fortress was actually Victor locking a different door, one that leads straight back to Kyle himself, sealing him inside with the very man he is trying to destroy? Kyle had become too bold in his decision to stand against Victor. But what made it truly frightening wasn't the surface-level recklessness, it was the quiet, deliberate intention beneath it. In Genoa City, people are used to power wars playing out like theater, loud turns, obvious betrayals, clean dramatic reveals. Kyle chose something colder. He stepped into conflict like a man whose emotions had been worn down to the bone, as if disappointment had sanded him raw for so long that hope no longer had any power to stop him. What happened with Claire, the ongoing fractures inside his family, the constant sense of being trapped between two bloodlines and two empires known of it, exploded into a public tantrum. It condensed into something denser, something more dangerous. Kyle started to see Victor not just as the Newmans' weapon against the Abbotts, but as the symbol of a system that had used him, pushed him, and reduced him to a piece on someone else's board. From that moment, revenge stopped being a mood. It became a choice, a path he forced himself to walk to the end simply to prove that Victor could not always be the one who wrote the rules. Kyle approached Victor with a calm that looked like maturity but was actually forged in conflict. He spoke about wanting to make amends, wanting a fresh opportunity at Newman Enterprises, carrying the posture of someone who had learned the cost of open defiance. On the outside, it was a familiar story in Victor's world. A young man makes mistakes, then returns to the most powerful man in the room and asks for a second chance. But inside Kyle was a far more complicated machinery. Because he understood what Victor craved most, submission. He understood that if he wanted to strike Victor, he would have to give Victor exactly what Victor wanted to see. Kyle performed remorse with control, presented himself as someone exhausted by family battles, someone who wanted a clean, right road forward. That polished reasonableness made the air tighter because it was too neat, too perfectly assembled. Like a mask scrubbed so clean it reflected light back at you. Victor, of course, was suspicious. Suspicion wasn't just a habit for him, it was a survival reflex. The instinct that had carried him through war after war. He looked at Kyle like a problem not yet solved, not an opportunity. And yet Victor's suspicion has always traveled alongside a familiar blind spot. The belief that he can use anyone, as long as they are useful and as long as they are afraid enough. So even while keeping his distance, he still offered Kyle a strategic position. It was a test, and it was also a way of pulling Kyle into Victor's orbit. As if proximity itself could turn danger into control. Victor believed he was securing an advantage, turning an Abbott into a Newman asset. Kyle understood that this was the doorway he needed. And the truly unsettling part was that both men believed they were the one holding the key. Kyle proved himself quickly. He worked with the focus of someone who no longer allows himself to waste time on fragile feelings. He absorbed procedure, read the rhythm of Newman Enterprises, learned what Victor cared about most and which spaces Victor assumed no one would ever dare to touch. He became reliable in a way that felt almost safe. And that reliability earned him early trust, not because anyone loved him, but because his performance was steady and useful. Even Victor's associates began to see Kyle as a functional link in the chain. Kyle built the image of a man who had accepted his place, who no longer wanted to stir storms. And that stability became the perfect foundation for what he was really doing. Because nothing helps an insider survive longer than convincing everyone to stop watching. While he delivered results, Kyle quietly began collecting what mattered. He gathered confidential information about business plans and Victor's vulnerabilities. But he did it without hunger, without greed, without leaving behind the scent of someone hunting. He treated access like routine, like responsibility, like something that belonged to his job description. He watched how Victor made decisions, how Victor reacted to major projects, how deeply Victor hated being cornered into explanations. Kyle understood that Victor's weakness was not a lack of power, it was the certainty that his power could bend any rule. And when a man believes that, he often exposes shadows he assumes no one will ever dare to examine. Kyle started linking pieces together, memorizing, selecting, saving the fragments that could become a blade. He disciplined himself into a kind of emotional frost, because he knew one small error would collapse everything in his hands. Once he had enough data and enough understanding of the system, Kyle shifted from collecting to interference. He secretly planted false evidence, created gaps inside Newman's operations, and prepared for a larger strike. This was where his boldness stopped being about intention and became about action, about his willingness to reshape reality in his favor. The false evidence wasn't just a trick. It was Kyle's attempt to manufacture a new version of truth, something that could destabilize Newman Enterprises from the inside, without immediately revealing the source. He created a crack the way someone lightly fractures stone, believing that if the timing and pressure are right, the crack will spread. The terrifying part was that he did it not in a rush of emotion but in a state of ruthless clarity, as if he had already accepted whatever consequences might come as long as Victor was forced to taste what it feels like to lose control. A major Newman project weakened and Victor began struggling in a fight against a rival. On the surface, it could look like a chain of misfortunes, operational errors, unlucky timing. But Victor has never experienced failure as simple bad luck. Failure, to him, always smells like betrayal. And when his control is threatened, his instincts move fast, searching for the hand that touched the order of his world. Kyle watched Victor tighten, watched suspicion grow in the way Victor checked everything, in the way his gaze sharpened on employees, in the way ordinary explanations stopped satisfying him. Kyle understood he was pulling Victor closer to the edge. And he understood the closer Victor came to eruption, the higher the risk of being exposed. Yet Kyle kept moving because in Kyle's mind, stopping now would mean losing and losing would mean accepting that he would always be led by Victor's gravity. Then Kyle transferred everything informally, planted threads, critical evidence to Jack Abbott in a way that was safe and controlled. It didn't feel like a family reunion. It felt like a wartime exchange where trust is less emotion than calculation. Kyle didn't need Jack to understand every internal conflict inside him. He didn't need Jack to repair the fractures Kyle carried. Kyle needed one thing: for Jack to use what he was given correctly at the right moment, in the right direction. Because if the blow wasn't strong enough, Kyle would become a pointless traitor, reckless, exposed, and empty-handed. And Kyle could not endure that. He could not bear the idea of trading away his safety, his name, and the last remaining pieces of belief he once had, only to land in a half-finished outcome. Jack used the data to strike Newman Enterprises hard. And Victor's rage was not only the rage of a man being attacked, it was the rage of a man being humiliated. Losing is one thing. Being hurt by someone you took in, someone you thought you had folded into your control, is another kind of insult. That humiliation thickened the air, because it awakened the most dangerous part of Victor, the need to punish. Victor didn't have to say anything for people to feel how tightly he was clenching the situation. He began rechecking systems, tracking patterns, scanning for fingerprints, not like a CEO managing a crisis, but like a predator tracing blood. Newman Enterprises became a tense, watchful space where every step could be a silent alarm. Every glance could be an accusation that hadn't yet turned into words. And then Victor discovered Kyle's hand. This was the moment the controlled calm shattered at the edges. Kyle understood that once Victor truly recognized what happened, strategy would stop feeling like a game and start feeling like survival. The drama wasn't in speeches, it was in the reality that there was no clean exit. Kyle, who had tried to control every stage, now had to face the truth Victor represents. Victor is the best at turning someone else's mistake into their sentence. Kyle knew Victor wouldn't simply want to win. Victor would want to crush him, to make Kyle into an example so no one else ever dares to attempt the same betrayal. Yet Kyle was no longer easily frightened. He had gone too far to back away, and that boldness hardened into something almost desperate. The confrontation arrived like a storm that didn't need thunder. It was the collision of two wills, two models of power, two definitions of control. Kyle realized that during the infiltration he hadn't only collected information. He had changed himself, trained himself to become colder, quieter, more ruthless. The frightening part was that he wasn't sure he could return to who he used to be. Victor, on the other side, recognized something equally dangerous. Kyle's greatest threat was not the data he took, but the fact that Kyle proved an Abbott could enter the Newman fortress and shake it from within. That creates precedent, and Victor hates precedent even more than he hates loss. The consequences became unpredictable, not because no one could guess Victor would retaliate, but because no one knew how far Kyle would go when pushed into a corner, how he would behave when everything he did was dragged into the light. Yet even with the truth exposed, the story did not close neatly. Some plans do not end with a clear victory or defeat, they linger like an infection under the skin. Kyle has already given Jack what he needed to hit Newman Enterprises, and Victor has already traced the damage back to Kyle. So what remains is the next step and the real cost of beating Victor. Is Kyle truly prepared to face consequences even he cannot fully imagine? Or does he still believe he holds one last piece of control? And in the strange pause that follows when the tension is high enough to break, but hasn't shattered yet, it feels as if Victor is looking at Kyle not only with anger, but with something colder, more strategic, as if he has found a way to make this war last longer than any financial loss ever could. Kyle senses it too, that unnatural quiet after exposure, like there is still one missing piece not yet set into place. And that uneasy incompleteness makes the moment feel less like an ending, and more like a stopping point, forcing the question to hang in the air. Is this the beginning of Kyle's downfall? Or the moment Victor starts rewriting the game in a far more ruthless language? On our TV Spoilers channel, I'm always looking for content inspiration for each video by compiling short video clips to analyze and offer my personal opinions. This channel specializes in analyzing, theorizing, and discussing plot points in the Young and the Restless series from the perspective of a longtime fan. Through this, viewers can gain deeper, more objective, and more interesting insights. Subscribe to the channel to stay updated on the latest news about the Young and the Restless series.